Hey everybody, and welcome back to another fun and exciting pre-algebra class. Today we're going to be doing lessons 1.7 and 1.9, try to condense them into one video. So pay attention, it's going to come at you fast. So go ahead and turn to page number 27. Page number 27, you are going to see the word ratio. What is a ratio? A ratio is basically comparing two numbers. You can compare anything that you want. Let's go ahead and compare. We're going to compare girls to boys. Now, let's say that your class or your group at church or something. Let's say that it's a girl and a boy split, and let's say that there are 5 girls and 3 boys. Okay, so 5 girls to 3 boys. I don't like that. It looks off balance, right? So let's go ahead and move that. There we go. That looks a little bit better. So 5 girls to 3 boys. That's the split. There's 5 girls in the class and there's 3 boys in the class. So this first number right here, the first number is called the antecedent. The girls in this case, because that's the one we're starting with, that's the first number that's given. So the girls would be the antecedent. And then in this case, the second number that we're dealing with, the 3 boys here, that 3 would be the consequent. Okay, not the consequence. Okay, this isn't something bad happening because you did something wrong. It's not a consequence, it's a consequent. Okay, so the antecedent and the consequent. Now, I do use this word consequent for remembering which one comes first and second. So it's easy to remember the consequences, like when you get in trouble for something, come after, right? So this consequent right here, it comes after. It's the second one. Maybe that helps you. Maybe it doesn't. If it does, awesome. If it doesn't, erase it out of your brain. All right, 3 ways to write a ratio. So we'll go ahead and write it with the word 2. We kind of already did that. So 5 to 3. 5 to 3. We could also write it with a colon. So we could say 5 and then this colon deal right here. That's from English class. So 5 to 3. You actually say the word 2 even if you write it like this. So you'd say 5 to 3. Okay. The other way that it can be written is as a fraction, 5 to 3. Okay. And again, you still say it with the word 2. You don't ever vary from using the word 2. 5 to 3, 5 to 3, and 5 to 3 is how you would read that. The reason is, going back up here, is because we're making the comparison. So when we're comparing something, we say 5 to 3, and now we know that we're comparing those two things together. So is this a fraction or is this a ratio? Yes, the answer is yes. It's a fraction, okay? But in this case, we're using it as a ratio because we're comparing two things together. All right, now, I've written this down here. It's kind of small, but I think you can read it. Reduce but leave improper. So if you're dealing with a fraction, you would leave it improper. The 5 would have to stay on top. And there's a reason. Because that is the, what? Go back to this word. That is the antecedent. Okay? So the antecedent has to stay on top of the fraction. The consequent comes second, so it has to stay on the bottom of the fraction. Now, we would reduce it. Let's say that we had a ratio, and instead of 5 to 3, it was 6 to 3. We would reduce this, okay? So this would actually equal what? It would equal, reducing that would be 2 to 1. So you always want to give your fractions in lowest terms, and we've talked about how to reduce fractions. So you'd always want to give your fraction in lowest terms, but always leave it improper. In fact, from now on, you can always leave your fractions improper. Always. Just leave them improper. Okay? In algebra class, in anything, always leave your fractions improper unless the teacher tells you not to for some reason. Like, for example, if I'm teaching you or showing you how to reduce or how to simplify, then I would say in lowest terms or express as a mixed number, something like that. But if I don't say anything or if your teacher doesn't say anything, then always put it in an improper fraction. Never in algebra, never turn it into a mixed number. Okay? All right, proportions. And again, this is on the next page, page number 28. So what a proportion is two equivalent ratios. So you're taking two ratios. Check this out right here. I made a proportion right there. This ratio equals this ratio. Okay. Anytime you reduce a fraction, you didn't even know you were making proportions, but you were. Anytime you reduce a fraction, you are making a proportion. Didn't even know it, but you were. All right, so there is what's called the fundamental property of proportions. Super important right here. The fundamental property of proportions means that the product of the means, what's the means? We're going to talk about that in a second. Always equals, notice it says always, okay? That means always. There's no exceptions to this. The product of the extremes. What's the extremes? Well, I'm glad you asked. The extremes is the outer number of our proportion. The means is the inner number of the proportion. What do I mean by that? Well, let's go back to the one that we've been using. We'll jump on this one right here, 6 over 3. So let's write it. 6 over 3 equals 2 over 1. Now, if we take this and we say, okay, the outer numbers, which one are the outer numbers? Well, let's write it a different way. Let's write this as a ratio. 6 to 3 equals 2 to 1. Okay, now we actually do have outer numbers. Look, the 6 and the 1 are like on the outside. So if we do it like this is like the 6 and the 1, the first one and the last one. That's the way to think about it if you have them in fractions. The first one and the last one. The first one and the last one. These are the outer numbers. These are the extremes. Notice, if we multiply the extremes, what do you get when you multiply the extremes? 6 times 1 equals 6. Okay? Now, let me change the color here so you can see it. And it says it always equals the product of the means always equals the product of the extremes. So that's the product of the extremes. Now let's do the other one. Let's do the means. So 3 and 2 are the means. They're the inner ones. So if we do 3 times 2, notice we also get 6. This is the way to check, is it actually a proportion? If it is, it will equal itself. They'll be the exact same every single time. Okay, so if you missed anything there, slide it back, watch it again. Let's go ahead now and skip to lesson 1.9, and that is on page number 36. The fraction here is going to be 1/2. Okay, most people know what that fraction looks like. They know that it's 0.5, right? So it's half of something, or 0.5 of something, or 50% of something. Okay, so how do we get there? How do we know that? Well, a lot of times it's just we kind of know because we've been doing fractions. Maybe we've been doing 1/2 for a long time. We know that 1/2 is 50% or 0.5. How do we figure that out? How do we get to these different things? How do we make these jumps? And this is important because I want you to understand this concept. So I'm using an easy one so that hopefully you can understand as we're going from thing to thing. What we're going to do is first of all remember what this fraction bar is. That fraction bar means division. It means to divide. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to divide 1 by 2. We'll put a decimal and add a 0, and we'll go 2 goes into 10. Just move your decimal right up here. 2 goes into 10 5 times. 2 times 5 again is 10, and this gives us 0. So the solution to dividing 1 by 2, or the way that you can also read this is 1, okay, divided by 2. 1 divided by 2. So that's what you do. 1 divided by 2. All right, so when we do that, we get 0.5. So that is the decimal equivalent of 0.5. Now, how do you get a decimal to a percent? How do we do that? Well, you do it basically by understanding what this percent sign means. When I learned Spanish, I learned that percent in Spanish is por ciento. Okay, and I'm telling you that for a reason. The word por in Spanish means by, and ciento means 100. So the word for percent in Spanish is by 100. Okay, and so that's what this is. We are going to divide it by 100. So in other words, it means hundredth. Watch what I do. I'm going to take this decimal and I'm going to move it 2 places. 1, 2. I'll put a 0 in there, and then I'll put my por ciento by 100 sign. And you said, I don't understand what you're doing by 100. Okay, when we multiply or divide by 100, we just move the decimal. So in other words, if I'm going to multiply 5 by 100, all I have to do is take the decimal point and move it 2 places to get 500. 5 times 100 is 500. When we're multiplying by 100, all we have to do is move our decimal point 2 places because it's by 100. Por ciento by 100. So this becomes 50, and then we put a percent sign, 50%. That's where the percent comes from. So let's rewind this again. All right, so let's go back here to how do we go from the fraction to the decimal. All right, we divide. We do this right here. That gives us our decimal. How do we get from the decimal to the percent? We times by 100, or we move the decimal point 2 places and then put the percent sign. These are not hard steps. This is just kind of the progression that we make. So let's do another one real quick. Let's do one that maybe you're not quite as familiar with, but it's still not that challenging at the same time. Let's do one, we'll do one that's a little bit, we'll do 1/3, okay? And you'll see what this one looks like. But we're going from 1/3. Now we want to go to the decimal of 1/3. Well, we need to divide it. So we say 1 divided by 3, and we can add a 0. So we get point, and that goes in 3 times, and we get a 9 and a 10. And what happens here is that 3 just keeps repeating it because we keep getting a 9 here, and then we keep subtracting, and we get a 10. It just keeps repeating. The same thing keeps happening. So in this case, our decimal is going to be 0.333, and we can put a line over those 3's. You could even write it just 1-3 with a line over it if you wanted to. That's fine. What that line over it means is that it continues repeating. Now, how do we get our percent? We move our decimal point 2 places. Now, you got to be careful in this repeating one, because that's why I put 3, so that you can see that there's 3 spots. So I'm going to move it 2 spots, and I'm going to get, and that's going to equal 33.3%, or you could just round it off to 33%. Okay? And that's the way that you would do 1/3. Now, can you imagine having to to every single time you wanted to know what a fraction was in a decimal or in a percent, you had to divide, and then you had to move the decimal and do all that stuff. Well, I'm going to give you a major shortcut, okay? I want you to look at this chart right here, all right? So these are common fraction and decimal equivalents. I want you to just memorize these. When you have the number 1, the decimal is 1.0 and the percent is 100%. Okay, so just go and just memorize these. 1/3, that's the one we did, 0.33 or 33.3%. 1/4, 1/4, we didn't do that one, but you get 0.25 or 25%. Again, moving the decimal 2 places. And you just continue down this path until you can. I just want you to memorize these. This little chart right here is very important for you to memorize. Why? Because you're going to use these in math. You're going to use these in life all the time. You're going to need to know what 1/5 is in decimal form and in percent form. It comes up all the time. Math is very important in life, and so we need to have some of these things in our mind. Also, I also want to teach you how to go from percent back to fraction. All right, because sometimes you need to do that. Sometimes you need to take something back to a fraction. So let's come up with a random one, and let's see what it looks like as a fraction. So let's do 52%. Well, that one's not on our chart. Look, we have 50% on our chart right there, but we don't have 52%. So the question is, how do I get that back to a fraction? Well, you just do the steps backwards. Now we're taking away the percent sign and we're moving our decimal 2 places to the left because we're going back to decimal. So it's 0.52. That's the decimal. Now, it's important to understand what this means right here. This means 52 hundredths. All right? So it means 52 over 100. 52 hundredths. Why hundredths? Because there's 2 decimal places, and when there's 2 decimal places, that's hundreds. It goes tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths, just like it does in regular place value. Okay, so now we're back to a fraction. The only problem is I don't like that fraction. Why not? Because we can reduce this fraction because there's a GCF. The GCF is 2. Look, 2 goes into 52. 2 goes into 52 26 times, and 2 goes into 100 50 times. Well, actually, that wasn't the GCF. That was just a common factor. We can do it again. We can go 2 into 26 and 2 into 50. 2 goes into 26 13 times. 2 goes into 50 25 times. So its fractional equivalent is 13 over 25. 52%, move the decimal 2 places, equals 0.52. Put it over 100 and reduce it, and you get 13 over 25. All right, hopefully you learned something there. If you missed anything, make sure you slide it back. We crammed 2 lessons into one, so there's a lot of information there, so make sure that you work hard. That's all I've got for you. Hope you learned something. See you later. Bye-bye.